Hey Guardians, there are 9 days left until Edge of Fate, and we are just about done with our exotic rankings here, and we are finally on exotic heavy weapons. Now, this list is a very complicated one, so I do want to briefly touch on how this ranking was done. There is plenty of variety in our exotic weapons. A lot of them have unique places in the metagame where they do something or provide something unique from other weapons. And some of them are higher tier because they are simply very good versions of their archetype. For example, Queenbreaker is obviously a really great linear fusion rifle. It puts up really great DPS and really great total damage. But its total damage is matched by regular linear fusion rifles that have competent rolls, right? Like a rewind round, bait and switch, 3-round burst linear puts out the same amount of damage as Queenbreaker. It does it a little bit slower, so it does have that niche over it, right? But in general, a lot of heavies are like that, where they have the same total damage, but they might do it in a different way or have a different mechanism of delivering their damage compared to their competitors. So some of these damage heavies are not going to be higher on the list just because a really competent legendary version would put up the same amount of damage in your rotations. So they're a bit lower, but they are on this list because even if they are matched by legendary weapons, they are what we call like consistent DPS, which is just you can pull these out and they will put in work in whatever you're doing, and you don't really have to worry about complicated mechanics or working really hard for the damage that they're going to do. So they are totally like powerful weapons. You're not really missing out on anything if you do run them, apart from the cost of running an exotic in another slot. And that's kind of why they're a bit more down. It's just the opportunity cost of running one of these damage exotics is that you're missing out on competent special exotics or primary exotics that can patch up holes in your loadout for regular damage. So keep that in mind, that is how I'm kind of doing this. The things at the top of this list aren't necessarily something that everybody's going to use in a damage phase together at the same time. However, they are metagame shifting. They're warping the game around them, which is why they're at the top. Or they do something totally unique that you can't get from the archetype in other ways. So we do have a couple honorable mentions. I am doing 3 this time instead of 2, just because there are a lot of exotics that are competent damage dealers that you can consider in any content that I want to include here for you to just think about using when you need a heavy that does damage. So our first honorable mention is going to be Leviathan's Breath. Anybody who's played the game since Beyond Light will know that after the Catalyst dropped and this thing got Archer's Tempo and more ammo in the mag, it has become a staple of contest rating, as well as just rating in general. This thing puts out heavy numbers. It's a little bit slower. It's an honorable mention because it does require high critical hit ratios to keep the DPS up, because if you're hitting body shots, you're taking way longer to draw this thing. As well as other exotics have come out or been updated to kind of power creep its place in terms of damage and DPS, but it is still competent, and it does have this ability to stagger things consistently, which is a very nice benefit to have in some encounters, which we're going to touch a little bit more on later. Now, our second honorable mention today is going to be Lament. Lament is a chainsaw sword. It's really cool. It does pretty good damage comparable to other heavy swords. A little bit less than something like a Bequest with Surrounded, and you have Surrounded proc the whole time, but you don't need to be surrounded, right? You just have to hold, block, and do your combo with Lament. If you don't know, Lament charges up damage the more you do attacks while blocking, and then when you do a heavy, it unleashes more damage. You have anti-barrier on here, healing on hit, which is not very much healing, so it's not like super important. And then Tireless Blade, if you are killing ads with this, every other kill will get you sword ammo back. So it's a pretty good ad killing weapon as well. The downside is, one, obviously it's a sword, so it just doesn't give you very safe damage. And 2, it has really bad tracking where you'll slide past enemies a lot in a damage phase. On Crota, this thing was like getting us killed and missing us damage, so we ended up swapping, to Bequests or making Caretakers just to be able to hit him without sliding past. But that said, it is still, if you have nothing better, an amazing sword to bring into endgame content. And our final honorable mention is going to be 1K Voices. 1000 Voices from The Last Wish is one of the raid exotics of all time. It is simultaneously one of the most fun exotics to use and one of the most frustrating. It has really good DPS, very strong in the short term. It also has a very strong stagger effect like Leviathans. I said I was going to talk about it later. This is now. Leviathans and this both have high stagger, so in Ultimatum, Spire of the Watcher, 1k was what we used for our ultimatum clear because shooting 1k at the boss would guarantee a stagger like every shot. So the boss didn't even make it out of the doorway before the damage phase ended. So it's a very strong thing to have in situations where you have a boss where you can stagger them. The downside of 1k is its total damage isn't really all there. You have very limited ammo. You get about 12 shots with this thing. And if this had more reserves, so we ever get the catalyst for more ammo, 1k could shoot up this ranking. It does work better on solar than other subclasses because you'll get an ignition every shot instead of every other shot, but you have no problems running this on any other subclass. It is a nice thing in situations where you don't need crits. If the boss doesn't take crit damage, this is a very consistent option for you to rely on. Starting off our 10th place list is going to be Legend of Acrius. It is a raid exotic that is now available from the kiosk, so you will need raid spoils, but it is base game, so you do not need to buy an expansion for it. If you are running Acrius, it is because you are doing a close range damage boss and you want to use Trench Barrel, and Lord of Wolves is not viable for whatever reason. Maybe that is because you need a long range special weapon to deal with some kind of enemy or some kind of mechanic in that encounter, or maybe you just need a weapon that will be competent without hitting headshots, because Lord of Wolves is more dependent on headshots than Acrius is, which is the only reason that Acrius has not fallen off of this list, with Lord of Wolves' buff being a special weapon that deals competent DPS and comparable total damage. Now, Acrius is a very simple exotic. It has Trench Barrel, which if you don't know how that works for shotguns, you do melee damage, you get 3 shots that do 50% more damage. Other than that, it basically is just a shotgun with a wave that gets blasted out in front of it. It has a limited range before the projectiles despawn, so you want to be close for this. Extending the range does not do a ton for it, but once you get used to it and you try it a little bit, you'll see very quickly that just dropping a well and then sitting in the well and shooting the guy in front of you is good enough for this to work. You will want to learn the tech, which is basically just when you're out of mag capacity and you're reloading one shell at a time, you can actually reload a shot, shoot, reload a shot, shoot, and it's not going to affect your DPS at all because the reloading speed is the exact same as the fire rate. So you're not going to lose any DPS for doing that. That's what you should be doing. Throw your melee in to proc Trench Barrel and then just keep shooting. I am giving 9th place to Microcosm. If you do want to get your hands on Microcosm, you just have to finish the Final Shape campaign and then do the quest line for it, which is doing the expert master story missions with the co-op objective where you have to bounce around a debuff between you. Not too hard to do. It is higher light level, so get some friends together, LFG it. It's not too bad. You don't wipe. It's not a GM, so you're not going to get kicked to orbit. It is just something that will take you a little bit of time to get done. It has taken the place of a lot of the easy DPS options in our loadouts. So for a lot of raid scenarios and things like that, where you just need a teammate to get something equipped to do damage that will be enough to clear the phase, but doesn't require too much of them, Microcosm is right now the go-to, which it is very simple. It is a trace rifle that you shoot at the boss, and when you pop your super, it gets more damage for 20 seconds. So for anybody who's using Nighthawk or Thunder Crash or Nova Bomb or any other super like that, that's a one-off that you're using in a damage phase, you can just throw that out and then just hold the trigger on Microcosm, and you'll get through the vast majority of your reserves before the buff wears off. It does have a bonus to get you some more super energy on kill, and it does a lot more damage to shields, but you're not generally using for that. If you're taking this into Nightfalls, that might be a little more important. But for its place on this list, it is just a very, very competitive total damage and DPS option. There is one easy option above this that I think you're going to recognize, and then is above that because it has gotten some buffs recently. So, of course, I am talking about our 8th place, which is Thunderlord. This is a base game exotic, so you will just go ahead and log in. You don't need to buy an expansion. You just need to start opening exotic engrams, and eventually you will get Thunderlord. Thunderlord was the king of our lazy DPS, and then Microcosm came out, and then Bolt Charge came out, and since Thunderlord has baked in Bolt Charge, I'm going to include it in what we're talking about right now. So while you are shooting targets with Thunderlord, you will get slowly a faster fire rate, which will ramp up your DPS, and every couple of shots you will spawn a lightning bolt. This lightning bolt will do damage and give you a Bolt Charge stack, which can then stack up through the gunfire and through additional lightning strikes. With the catalyst, every lightning strike will cause your magazine to partially reload, so you will get about double the mag capacity out of this than you see listed if you are hitting all of your shots. And then if you're throwing abilities in the middle of the phase, since you have Bolt Charge stacks up, you can discharge that Bolt Charge. It gets bonuses if you have a teammate with Storm's Keep, but it's not mandatory to bring Storm's Keep to use this. As a little bonus, for ad clear purposes at being a machine gun, Thunderlord does also excel there, where getting a kill with Thunderlord will spawn lightning strikes, which will, refill your magazine. And it comes with built-in overload, so taking it into GMs is still a breeze. It will tear up champions like they're nobody's business. And if there's not overloads, it's a little bit, weaker, but it's not bad at all. If you have the other two champion things covered by your special and your primary, Thunderlord is still a great option to bring in. 7th place on this list is going to be our last traditional exotic heavy. So this is the last one that's going to be a normal version of its frame, and that's going to be Queenbreaker. This is the best of what we're calling lazy DPS right now, or easy DPS, or just something that you can put on that will be competent enough to clear. This is our standard for contest right now. Aegis recently did a video right when I was talking about this with my raid team, but Queenbreaker is probably good enough to get through any boss in contest mode, and by Aegis's math, in any of the past contest modes, it would have very easily cleared those. So that's why some of these things below this, while they are below Queenbreaker, they're not deal breakers for contest mode or high difficulty content. They are also very competent weapons. Queenbreaker is just here because it is the best at what it does. It does have rewind rounds on it, so you are getting a lot of shots per magazine, which limits how much you have to reload. And with the rework, you have combat sights giving you a 3-round burst option, which, while you are firing it, also ramps up your fire rate. So you're not going to get more damage than a regular heavy linear, but you are going to wind up your DPS much faster than other linears. If you do not have Queenbreaker, it is from the Forsaken expansion, so you should be able to get it with the exotic kiosk and some of those ciphers. It shouldn't take you too much work. The Catalyst is pretty mandatory if you want to use this for DPS, but it does drop from Strikes, Crucible, and Gambit, so it's pretty easy to get your hands on. And as a final note on Queenbreaker, it does have a special ability where you can hold R to change into a regular linear mode. That single shot linear mode will do more damage per shot, but it's not more damage overall. It does fire 1 bolt, which will chain lightning to nearby enemies, so it can ad clear, and whatever you hit becomes blinded, so it is anti-unstop as well built in. So it is also a very flexible option for taking into GMs, not just raid encounters or for damage. In 6th place, we have Season of the Chosen's pass weapon, which is Grand Overture. This is a machine gun, but this is not a regular machine gun, and that's why it's up here very high. It does not rely on headshots at all. The projectiles it shoots are basically explosives. Bungie calls them slugs, but they're basically like the Cabal champion machine gun heavy blue blaster that just hits you and does a lot of damage. That's what the regular shot is. The main appeal of this is if you wind it up or you charge up shots by firing normally, you will charge up the alt fire, where you can hold R to load up rockets, which is equal to the number of shots that you hit, up to 20, which is the mag capacity for this thing. So for a lot of raids and dungeons, we have brought Grand Overture in to handle this sort of long-range DPS where something like Div is not making up your difference. Queenbreaker and Whisper are not getting consistent headshots. This is probably more of a better thing in dungeons where you have less people and you can sacrifice the damage less than if you're in a raid where sacrificing the damage for a Div is not as impactful. Taking this into Nightfalls or dungeons or other endgame content is still a really good idea, because these projectiles that are normal fired still one-shot adds, and they provide decent damage to other tankier targets while you're charging the missiles. It has some of the best burst DPS and pairs with it a very high total damage, but it is a little clunky to use if you're not like a Titan with Actium, because it does reload very slowly. If you can bypass that, it gets better and better, but every time you stop shooting, it has a short wind-up period before you can shoot again. But that said, it is a very consistent option that does something that the other weapons can't. The Catalyst is also pretty useful. I haven't unlocked it just because it takes ad kills to get, and I'm mostly using this for boss damage when I've done it. But the missiles will blind targets. I'm not entirely sure if this is arc blind off the top of my head, because I haven't used it. But it also basically gets chain reaction on those missiles, so if you are using it for ad clear, a little boost there, but it is not mandatory for you using this against bosses. 5th place is going to a classic, which is Sleeper Simulant. You may ask yourself, why is Sleeper above Queenbreaker? Sleeper does not have the total damage that Queenbreaker does. What it does have is comparable DPS. It has much fewer shots to fire, so you have to keep your aim on target for less. You have more time to wind up shots if you're taking your time. It has a very comparable time to empty its magazine, but you're not trying to constantly track somebody's head like a 3-round burst on Queenbreaker, or if the div goes down, you're not missing as much time as you are with a Queenbreaker. The other advantage of Sleeper Sim is if the bubble breaks, or the div is reloading, or a boss moves, or something weird happens, Sleeper Simulant is the only linear fusion rifle with very good body shot damage. One of the reasons we used this in Pantheon was when we were fighting Nezarec, we were like hiding on this tree branch for avoiding his attacks, and we would try to shoot him, and he moved a lot, so it was hard to get div up. But Sleeper could still do pretty good damage without needing to hit a headshot anyways. And it basically still two-phased him, hitting body shots with Sleeper. That is not something that you can do with like Queenbreaker or Thunderlord or Microcosm. Now, Grand Overture does compete with that. You could kind of argue over which of those you prefer to use, but Sleeper does empty its reserves faster, but its projectiles don't have travel time like Grand Overture, so it feels a bit easier to use overall. The Catalyst is absolutely mandatory, however, to use Sleeper Simulant. You get increased reserves, and it brings your charge down from 1 full second to 3/4 of a second, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're dumping this thing, it is very, very noticeable. To get this thing, you want to buy it from the kiosk in the tower. You have to own the base game, so it's not anything big to ask. And then the Catalyst should drop from Strikes, Gambit, and Crucible. If you are wondering for a more recent example of using this thing, I used this thing for contests under Doctrine on the second and third encounter because we didn't have a div and I didn't want to use Queenbreaker. We still got a very comfortable 3-phase on both bosses. We didn't even come close to, dying to Enrage or the timer or anything. So this gets here based on being just a very unique linear fusion rifle. In 4th place, I think a lot of you might actually be excited about this one. This is Parasite from the Witch Queen post campaign. So if you finish Witch Queen and then you do the post game quest, you'll get Parasite. Very easy to get, no catalyst to get. It is a very unique grenade launcher, and it has very specific applications in endgame, but it is an extremely fun weapon to use. Now, this weapon charges up based on getting kills with other weapons or abilities. Once you scale it up, you can get up to 20 stacks, and it will do like 3 times the damage of its normal shot. Its normal shot is a bit stronger than a rocket with bait and switch active. So imagine shooting 3 bait and switch rockets in 1 shot, and then when it explodes, it does a lot of damage. It will hit you, and if it hits you, you then get 15 seconds where you get bonus damage with your other weapons. That is Worm byproduct. It is about a 10% buff, and it stacks with everything. So using this for 1 shot and then switching to a high damage special can get you very high DPS, and if you are trying to mag dump it, it still does very good total damage. It's just a little bit slower on long-term DPS than something like Queenbreaker, but it still has very good total damage to keep up. It's not something we use in every raid encounter. It's not always what you're looking for. Specifically on Atrax, though, this is like the best weapon in the game, where if you show up with 4 or 5 fully charged parasites, get a weaken, get a little bit of Radiant on, and then shoot the parasites, you can kind of just one-shot him. This thing will also do really good in champion content, where maybe you're getting not full stacks all the time, but even 5 or 6, and then shooting a champion with it will nuke champions in endgame. So it is a very unique grenade launcher. It's not just dump the entire mag in something, it is switching to, shooting, switching off. Very fluid kind of exotic to use. In 3rd place, we have a raid exotic, an old one from Forsaken that you can get if you have Forsaken, and some exotic ciphers and some spoils of conquest, and that is Anarchy. Anarchy is not an everywhere exotic. It is specifically useful in longer damage phases than short damage phases because it is a damage over time exotic. It doesn't have the best total damage, but it does have some of the best total damage. We're talking competitive with like machine guns, but instead of having to sit there and shoot a machine gun the whole time, you can tag 2 shots of Anarchy on a boss to get max damage, just to max its stacks, and then you can use a high damage special to maintain your DPS and work on your total damage. In longer damage phases, this is still one of the best weapons. So we're talking like Corrupted Puppeteer, and then you can use this on things like Taniks. Warlord's Ruin's final boss is also a great target for this. And it's not going to fall behind. You just need a very good special weapon to be your main DPS dealer, and then Anarchy is just providing total damage over time. Anarchy also has other uses in endgame, mainly being trapping doorways, or killing champions, or killing elites. With 24 rounds at base as your like reserve capacity, 1 projectile can kill multiple enemies, or 1 very tanky enemy pretty reliably. As long as you're stunning your champions and not losing the damage of Anarchy, it will go a lot farther than any regular legendary. And as a benefit, this is one of the only damage over time effects that does stack. So your entire raid team can use this at the same time, and they will all stack. In 2nd place, we have another weird one, Tractor Cannon. This is base game D2. You can get it from random exotics, I believe. And it is not a damage weapon outright in its own. Its total damage and its DPS are bad. However, this is one of 3 sources of 30% Void Weaken. On most raid teams, this is something that one person will equip for a damage phase, and then they'll go do special damage. Or if you're running something like a GM and you're running a melee build, you'll see a lot of like glaive builds run tractor cannon to give their build a 30% damage buff that stacks on pretty much anything else, because most people aren't running weaken as a normal ability in their kit. The main power of tractor being a weapon is you can stack damage buffs on subclasses that are a bit stronger than void, and then combine that multiplicatively with tractor cannon, or special weapons with something like Praedyths, getting bait and switch and kinetic tremors going, having some of the highest like total damage for a sniper, and then you just slap a 30% on there on top for free. You can do that with tractor. You're not going to run multiple of these, but it will make everything else you do as a group a much easier experience. The catalyst for this is just increased ammo reserves, which is pretty strong. You will see a lot of tractor cannon in endgame and raids and other situations, but this is something that enhances an entire fire team. And finally, our first place as like the most powerful exotic is one that has warped the game around it since it has come out. It is so strong that it was nerfed, and it is now the equivalent of a normal legendary version of this archetype, but it still is mandatory in almost any situation you're doing DPS. GMs, dungeons, raids, if you are doing damage with this weapon's archetype without it, you are throwing. And of course, we're talking about Galah Horn. Galah Horn is available in the 30th anniversary dungeon, Grasp of Avarice. You can get it from doing a quest, and the catalyst is also available in the dungeon from a secret quest. Unless you've been hiding under a rock, you probably know what Galah Horn does. It shoots rockets that shoot out little baby rockets that do more damage. Now, Galah Horn has been nerfed multiple times, so it is equivalent to like a legendary rocket without any damage perks by itself, which doesn't make it anything to scoff at, and it still has very good DPS. Its total damage is just a bit lacking. It does get 2 in the mag with the catalyst, and you get buffs to having Wolfpack rounds and killing more ads, so this gets to be a very strong ad clear rocket. But the main benefit is when you fire this thing, you give Pack Hunter to your teammates, which means they also get the Wolfpack rounds on their legendary rockets. For those of you who do not know, legendary rockets right now suck unless you're using Galah Horn. Galah Horn is a 25% buff, and that puts them on par for DPS and total damage to grenade launchers. And funnily enough, we are still using rockets for damage. We've been using rockets for damage since Cataclysmic got nerfed. And even before that, we were still using rockets pretty consistently to get Cataclysmic before then and in that time frame. Nothing in the game has warped the meta around it the way Galah Horn has. Legendary rockets could be competitive with grenade launchers if Galah Horn wasn't in the game. Because with Galah Horn in the game, rockets cannot be buffed to be competitive with grenade launchers, because then they would just be better than grenade launchers. So yes, you will only normally run 1 Galah Horn at a time. It is the most required exotic in the game, again. Bungie wanted it to not be mandatory in the game, and that's why they gave it Pack Hunter in the first place, to let everybody get Wolfpack rounds so nobody has to be sad about not having Galah Horn. Now it has made it so that if somebody does not have Galah Horn, you don't have rockets in the game. Yes, I'm a little bit mad about that, because a lot of rockets are really fun to use, but you notice when Galah Horn is not around. You see your damage fall off a cliff, which is just frustrating to no end, because I would like to run other rockets. And the assumption has become, if you are doing endgame content, you either have Galah Horn or you have a perfect rocket. And if you're not doing something with a tight damage window, like a contest raid or a master raid, you can still whip out 6 Galah Horns, and you'll probably still clear that encounter reliably. You'll have fun doing it because you get to shoot 2 rockets at a time, and who doesn't like the sound of Galah Horn? You have benefits to reloading near your teammates, basically, which is ensemble. This thing is just one of the easiest weapons to use. It's not going to single-handedly, win you a contest raid on its own, but it is pretty much mandatory for you clearing a contest raid at all. So I apologize for the mini Galah Horn hate rant. The new Galah Horn is somehow even more disgusting than the original version of the weapon in D1 that Bungie was so afraid of bringing back to the game. And for anything that's not a contest raid, I think you'll be surprised how fun it is to just use Galah Horn sometimes. Like, load into a GM and bring Galah Horn. Bring 3 Galah Horns. And since you have 3 of them, why not shoot some ammo at ads and some majors every now and then? Whenever you see a big enough pack, just give them a rocket. If you have somebody with Cenotaph on, you're never going to run out of rockets. So there we go. That is our top 10 exotic heavy list. Now, like I said, this is a very weird one. And I don't want you all to look at this and say, oh, well, Anarchy is in the top 3, so we should always run Anarchy. The bottom 5 spaces on this list are exotic heavies that you can run all the time and get consistent value out of. If you don't know what to run, you don't have an exotic equipped, you just want something that'll provide really good value, take one of those first 5. And then if you are getting into late game and you are looking for something to build around and have an entire unique situation that you are able to solve with these heavies, start looking at those top 5 or 6. Because like I said, the earlier ones are much stronger versions of regular base legendary heavies, but they can be beaten by legendary heavies. Whereas these top 5 or 6 are totally unique, and you're never going to find a heavy that competes with them the way they compete with Queenbreaker or Thunderlord. I will say I'm fairly certain if you took any of these exotics into an LFG raid, nobody would tell you like switch off. Maybe somebody would say, hey, switch off Galah Horn, we're doing linears for this boss, so maybe you put on Queenbreaker. But like if you have these 10 exotics, there is nothing in the game that you can't finish and complete. There's no damage check you won't hit. There is no contest mode modifiers or changes that you will be unable to complete. The hardest part of endgame is staying alive to do all your damage. All of these have the damage and DPS to complete the hardest difficulties. So I hope that maybe you'll look out for some of these and build into some of them more. Maybe you'll think about bringing out Parasite more and getting more use on that, because it is a great exotic that a lot of us just don't use very often. Yeah, I would love to hear what you guys think about this list. And if you have any other exotics that you think meet the criteria of being really unique and game warping around them, go ahead and let me know. And don't you dare say Deathbringer, because I wish that thing was super cool and awesome to use. But did you know if you have 2 Deathbringers, they'll start despawning orbs before they do damage? Come on, Bungie, it has been out for like 4 years. Can we get a Deathbringer fix? I want to run that thing.